The desert stretched endlessly, a barren wasteland under the scorching sun, miles of sand and scrub baked by the relentless heat. No sign of life save for a lone hawk circling high above, a harsh, unforgiving landscape. Two figures trudged through the oppressive heat, their faces etched with worry. Sarah and David, lost and far from any road. Their car had died miles back, a casualty of the unforgiving terrain. Now they were at the mercy of the desert. The wind picked up, swirling sand around their feet, whispering tales of danger. The sun, a burning eye in the sky, began to dip towards the horizon. Casting long, ominous shadows, fear gnawed at their hearts. Night was coming. A low rumble in the distance. Not the rumble of an engine, but something far more powerful, something ancient and untamed. The sky, once clear blue, darkened with alarming speed. The storm was upon them. Wind howled like a banshee, whipping sand into a blinding fury. The desert floor, moments ago still and calm, transformed into a raging tempest. Visibility dropped to mere feet. The world became a swirling vortex of sand and wind. Sarah and David, caught in the storm's fury, stumbled blindly. Fear, raw and primal, clawed at their throats. Each gust threatened to rip them apart. They needed shelter. Now, through the swirling sand, a faint glimmer. A neon sign flickering erratically, a beacon of hope in the heart of the storm. They stumbled towards it, driven by desperation, each step a battle against the wind's wrath. Closer now, the sign resolved itself. Bates Motel, it proclaimed in faded glory, one letter flickering ominously. Not salvation, perhaps, but a shield against the storm's fury. They didn't have the luxury of choice. Storm, find shelter, if you can. They burst through the motel door, a dilapidated barrier against the raging storm. A bell jangled overhead, its cheerful chime at odds with the menacing atmosphere. Inside, silence, a heavy, expectant silence. The air hung thick and musty, heavy with the scent of decay and forgotten things. Dust motes danced in the weak light, filtering through grime-coated windows. Time seemed to stand still within these walls, trapped in a bygone era. Behind a chipped counter, a figure stirred, an old man, his face a road map of wrinkles and forgotten sorrows. He regarded them with a vacant stare, his eyes like two black marbles in the gloom.
"Shelter."
David gasped, his voice barely audible above the storm's roar. The old man simply nodded, a slow, deliberate movement. He reached for a key, the metal cold and heavy in the deathly quiet. Their room, at the end of a long, dimly lit corridor, felt heavy with unseen eyes. The air grew colder as they crossed the threshold, a chill that seeped into their bones. The storm raged outside, but here an unsettling stillness prevailed. Wallpaper peeled from the walls, revealing faded floral patterns that spoke of a forgotten elegance. The furniture, draped in dusty sheets, hinted at a time when this place had known life, laughter, perhaps even love. Now, only shadows remained. Sarah shivered, pulling her thin jacket tighter. The unsettling silence pressed down on her, amplifying every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the wind against the window panes. She felt a presence here, unseen, but palpable. David, ever the pragmatist, busied himself securing the windows, reinforcing the flimsy latch with a chair. He tried to ignore the oppressive atmosphere, the feeling of being watched, but a shiver ran down his spine nonetheless. Nightfall deepened the motel's sinister ambience. The storm raged on, its fury echoing the turmoil brewing within their hearts. They huddled together on the lumpy mattress, the only source of light a flickering bedside lamp. Shadows danced in the corners, taking on grotesque shapes. Sleep wouldn't come. Every creak of the building, every groan of the wind sent shivers down their spines. Whispers seemed to emanate from the walls themselves, faint murmurs in an unknown language. They clung to each other, seeking solace in their shared fear. Then a sound pierced the storm's cacophony. A blood-curdling scream cut short. It seemed to come from the room next door, a room that the old man had insisted was empty. Their blood ran cold. David, his face pale but resolute, grabbed the rusty tire iron he'd found in the closet. He moved towards the door, every instinct screaming at him to run, to hide. But something, perhaps a misplaced sense of duty, compelled him forward. He edged the door open, the rusty hinges groaning in protest. The hallway beyond lay shrouded in darkness, the single flickering bulb at the far end doing little to penetrate the gloom. The air hung heavy with the metallic tang of blood. "Hello?" David called out, his voice trembling slightly. Only silence answered him, a silence more terrifying than any scream. He stepped into the hallway, each step echoing in the oppressive stillness. The door to the next room stood ajar, a black maw in the darkness. He could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears, a frantic drum against the silence. He raised the tire iron, a meager weapon against the unknown. As he approached the open door, a cold gust of wind slammed it shut with a resounding boom. David flinched back, his heart racing. He reached for the doorknob, his hand shaking. It was ice cold to the touch, as if the metal itself was alive. He threw open the door, his heart pounding in his chest. The room was empty. The bed remained untouched, the sheets pulled tight. There was no sign of any struggle, no trace of the blood he had smelled. Had he imagined it? Then he saw it. A figure, barely visible in the shadows of the far corner. Tall and slender, it seemed to melt into the darkness, its features obscured by the gloom. David froze, his breath catching in his throat. The figure moved, gliding silently towards him. It seemed to float across the floor, its feet making no sound. As it drew closer, David could make out the faintest glimmer of eyes, burning like embers in the darkness. Terror, raw and primal, seized him. He stumbled back, tripping over his own feet. The tire iron clattered to the floor, the sound deafening in the sudden silence. He scrambled back, desperate to escape the room, the motel, this nightmare. But the figure was faster. It lunged at him, its hand outstretched, its touch promising unimaginable horrors. David screamed, a desperate primal cry that echoed through the empty hallways of the motel. He scrambled back into his room, slamming the door shut and fumbling to lock it. The flimsy lock seemed woefully inadequate against the terror that clawed at the door. He could hear Sarah's terrified gasp as he turned, his face ashen and his eyes wide with fear.
"What was it?"
Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. David could only shake his head, unable to articulate the horror he had witnessed. Words seemed to fail him, lost in the face of the unimaginable. The storm raged outside, but it was the silence within that chilled them to the bone, a silence pregnant with dread, broken only by their ragged breaths and the frantic pounding of their hearts. They were trapped, hunted by something ancient and evil. David moved to the window, peering out into the storm-ravaged night. The wind howled, whipping rain against the glass like 1,000 tiny claws. The desert stretched out before him, a desolate wasteland offering no escape. He turned back to Sarah, his face grim.
"We're trapped. There's no way out in this storm."
Despair settled over them like a shroud, heavy and suffocating. They huddled together on the bed, listening to every creak and groan of the old motel. Every gust of wind, every patter of rain against the window seemed to whisper their doom. The figure in the shadows, the scream in the night, it was all becoming terrifyingly clear. The motel wasn't a refuge from the storm, it was a prison, a hunting ground for something sinister that lurked in its shadows, something that fed on their fear, their desperation. The storm outside reached a deafening crescendo, a symphony of wind and rain and fury, yet within the motel an eerie calm descended. The air grew heavy, thick with anticipation. The silence stretched, each second an eternity. Then a sound, a soft scratching sound at the door, slow, deliberate, like claws dragging across wood. Sarah and David exchanged a look of pure terror. Their breath caught in their throats, their eyes fixed on the door. The scratching stopped. Silence. Then a knock. One single, chilling knock. It echoed through the room, a death knell in the stillness. They didn't move. They couldn't move. Paralyzed by fear, they could only wait as the doorknob slowly began to turn, the rusty mechanism groaning in protest. Moonlight sliced through the widening gap, illuminating a single staring eye. The eye blinked, and a low, guttural voice, dripping with malice, shattered the silence.
"Well now, looks like we have some guests."
The door creaked open, revealing